to today's special webcast. I'm so delighted that you've taken the time to spend with us on this terrific webcast. You're going to be very excited because I know I am. I'm Amy Abel. I'm the Vice President for Human Capital Research here at the Conference Board, and today's conversation is around creating a coaching mindset for organizational impact. So it combines two of my favorite topics around coaching and emotional intelligence. So it's going to be very dynamic. We have an incredible lineup of speakers that will share their thoughts and their expertise with you. So let's jump into it so that we can get on with our program for today. Some of the topics that we will be discussing: the power of emotional intelligence in creating a coaching mindset. How can we, as well as our organizations, benefit? What does it mean when we have leaders that need a coaching mindset or skills? What does that look like? And of course, how can organizations shift to this people-minded culture? So we will hear some digging deeper into concepts and thought knowledge, as well as in practice, right? How can this look in a company today? So before I forget, if you are looking to earn credits for this webcast, please, you can see, depending on which ones you're looking for, you type in your name and your email, and we will issue you the credits as needed. Let me introduce to you my speakers and my guests for today. It's terrific. So first, I have Daniel Goldman, who is the author of Emotional Intelligence: Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. He's the co-director of the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations at Rutgers University. Of course, we all know him by his bestseller book that I just mentioned. You may not know that he has a brand new book coming out, The Emotionally Intelligent Leader. I know that I'm ready to sign up to get that copy. He's a frequent speaker to businesses. Daniel has worked with leaders around the world examining the way social and emotional competencies impact the bottom line. Based on all his writings and publications, Daniel has been ranked among the 25 most influential business leaders by several publications, including Time and the Wall Street Journal. So welcome, Daniel. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Amy. I'm really pleased I could join you.
Thank you. I'm also super excited to thank Jennifer Paylor for joining me from IBM. Jennifer lives to unite people as one team. How cool is that? Her career has evolved over the years, spending time in business transformation, manufacturing engineering, supply chain, corporate HR, leadership development, and consulting. She is a people person to the core, as people give the reach and extended capabilities to do amazing things in the business world. She's passionately changed the trajectory of her engineering career by going back to university to study the art and the science of developing people leaders. I just love the elegance of all of those statements that I think represent her. Today, Jennifer is a people engineer and a certified business coach. She leads the enterprise and operations services coaching and leadership development team responsible for agile transformation at IBM. She was also recently recognized as the top 50 world leaders in coaching by Thinkers 50 in 2019. So Jennifer, thank you as well for joining us on this webcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited, and nice to meet
Pleasure.
you, Daniel.
Likewise.
I hope the audience can tell we have just such an esteemed panel of speakers, so it's very exciting for me to talk about these topics and really meld them into how we are thinking about and then, of course, dealing with our business challenges of today. Yeah. So let me set the stage before we jump into some of the thought sharing. I wanted to set the stage with our 2018 Executive Coaching Report, which for members of the Conference Board you would have access to. One of the main themes of this research is around companies needing leaders with emotional intelligence to guide teams through ambiguity and change. Right? That might not be surprising to you that there's a lot of ambiguity and change in our business environments and in our world today, but what was very interesting to us from a research perspective was how prominent you can see in the chart leading teams and people development as the top, but emotional intelligence and executive presence were in competing with each other as the next one of importance, depending on whether you needed to look at internal coaching practices or external coaching practices. So that And if you have more questions about that, that's another conversation for another webcast. But what was really surprising to us of all of these elements of how leaders need to show up in the workplace around leading teams, executive presence, emotional intelligence, relationship management, coping with change, strategic thinking, right? That is just a lot of activity and a lot of capabilities that we're demanding of our leaders. One more, well, two more quick slides, which is around how coaching is used in organizations today. And you can see that there's a laundry list of types of coaching that we track, whether it's development-focused coaching, 360, onboarding, team coaching, etc. Development-focused coaching, you can see at the top of the list, is what we call future-focused coaching. We are preparing an executive for a future role. It's not about their current role, and it's not fixing a capability or a gap that they may have in their current role. It's about preparing them for what they will need to take on in the future. And you can see whether it's a CEO to all the different levels, by the way, CEO all the way down the line, the companies in our research effort show that development-focused coaching is the most important to them. Because right now, future efforts, future change, future technologies, all of these things create a lot of confusion for our business environments. And so then you can see why the theme is so prominent, right? So I think we need to dig deeper into this, and we need to sort of understand why this is so important. So first I'm going to, well, before I get to my polling question, I wanted to also invite the audience. During this webcast, please join us in this conversation by typing in your questions in the lower left-hand box. So I will feed the questions to our speakers, and we can sort of engage in this dialogue. So you're very welcomed and invited to join us in this conversation. Okay, so let's go to the first polling question as we unpack this research theme that I just talked about. So if you could, we wanted to ask you in the audience, think of the best boss you ever had. Can you describe in 1 or 2 words a characteristic of that person? So please go ahead and type in, and you can already see, those of you that are typing in, there are words like transparent and caring, genuine, dynamic, honest, authentic, great listener, integrity, emotional intelligence is in there, kind and empathetic, open-minded, honorable, encourages learning. And there's a lot of you on this webcast, so you can see I'm not able to keep up with your list, but supportive, shares information, caring and mature, supporting autonomy. Right. Lots of really, really great, great communicator, high expectations and clarity. Okay, if we could close the polling, please. Inclusive. All right, I hope both you, Daniel and Jennifer, I hope you've seen or heard the long list. Vulnerable is another good one. There's just a laundry list. So thank you to the audience for telling us some thoughts and characteristics of the best boss you've ever had. So let's go to the second polling question, please. And if you can see, think of the worst boss you've ever had, and can you describe in 1 or 2 words one characteristic of that person? So angry, bad communicator, self-focused, gossip, doesn't listen, poor communicator, emotionally volatile, micromanager, manipulative, controlling, narcissistic, micromanager, stagnant, ooh, that's a good one too, threatening, mistrustful, unorganized, unpredictable, ideas killer, that's a good one too, a liar, oh my, a bully, mean, not consistent, right, controlling, untrustworthy. Okay, I think we get the picture. Thank you again to the audience for typing that in. So let me turn it and start with Daniel, is to first get your reaction and, what do you think? And then how does this feed into some of the work that you've done in the past?
Well, first of all, I'm not surprised. I've done this around the world with business groups, and invariably, the boss that people love, the best boss, is someone who's emotionally intelligent. And the boss people hate, the one you never want to work for, the boss from you know where, is one who lacks all of those abilities. And we just found it again. If you look at my model here of emotional intelligence, it's a broad model, and it includes actually most of the things on your first list, everything but strategy, and I'll get to that. So there are 4 domains: self-awareness, self-management, empathy or social awareness, and putting that all together to manage relationships. Within each of those 4 domains, there are competencies that research has shown distinguish the outstanding leaders. Interestingly, IQ is not one of them. The reason is there's a floor effect for IQ. To get an MBA or an advanced degree, you have to have a certain level, at least a standard deviation above the norm. But once you're in the game, everybody else is about as smart as you are. So emotional intelligence turns out to differentiate, to be distinguishing. Intelligence, cognitive skills are a threshold. Everybody has to have them. So if you look at them, at the list, there are things like being able to manage your emotions, to self-regulate, to be adaptable. You talk about the environment today. I don't know when we've had to be more adaptable than these days. Empathy. In terms of coaching, by the way, I think 3 of these are particularly important. One is positivity. I just talked to someone who was coached, and he was totally deflated by his feedback. Because, you know, when you do a 360, people rate you anonymously, and you hear views of yourself that people would never tell you otherwise. And I think it was fed back to them in an unfortunate way. They looked at the negative instead of the positive, because coaches want to help people feel good about themselves and about their ability to develop and grow. Another core competence for any coach is empathy. And then a third is coaching itself. And here I have it on the model because I think any leader can be a coach. I don't think you need to be a professional coach. Everybody should realize, if they're in a leadership position, that they need to help people develop further skills. So nobody should be seen as written off for how they seem to be now. Let's look at the next transparency, because this is data from about 4,000 senior executives and their direct reports who are asked confidentially, what's it like to work for this person? Do you want to give your best or just do enough to keep your job? What kind of emotional climate do they create? And there are 2 styles of leadership that create a very positive climate. One is the leader who speaks from the heart to the heart about a shared mission, very, very moving and motivating, inspiring. The second is coaching. And I think coaching is an underrated part of leadership because, on the one hand, it's a way to create a strong bond with anyone who's a direct report. The other is it helps develop leadership for the future. It helps people get better as leaders. And there was an article in the Harvard Business Review called Leadership Run Amok. It was about the second category in our poll, people who are very results-oriented, but pay no attention to people as people. And it's very demotivating, it's alienating. I think it really hollows out the corporation itself to have leaders like that. So a leader, I think, needs to be a coach and needs to understand that that's part of the leadership role. I just started an organization, Goldman EI Coaching certification, to help people see how they can coach in the emotional intelligence area, because I think that's where leadership coaching really takes off.
So let me dig deeper with you, because we were just chatting. Your first emotionally intelligence book came out in 1995.
True.
And I remember that book, by the way. I read it and thought it was definitely, wow, something to think about. What's evolved since then, if anything, from an emotional intelligence perspective? How have our companies evolved or not evolved?
Right.
What's been going on that has made this, you would think, even more necessary today?
Well, I think there are a few forces going on. One is, when I wrote the book Emotional Intelligence, they said, people said to me, you can't use the word emotion in a company. This was 1995. Now emotional intelligence is taken for granted. The Harvard Business Review continually turns out books about it. And I think that just means that they see that there's a market for it, there's responsiveness. What's happened is that HR has really embraced emotional intelligence. It gives a vocabulary for something people knew, but couldn't articulate in a way that was acceptable. I was just at a major pharmaceutical company yesterday where the HR people were tearing their hair because it's a very high IQ organization. A lot of PhD researchers, they don't value this. But if you look at data from surveys around the world, you ask senior executives, about 90% say, of course you need soft skills, you need emotional intelligence. However, interesting, new hires, 70% say, no, you need tech skills. So I think there's a learning curve that has to be continually renewed in terms of onboarding, in terms of development and so on. You need to keep reminding people of something that we knew intuitively. We just proved it at the beginning of the show in those two polls. And that there's now a lot of data to support. But that every generation, I think, coming into business needs to learn anew.
So let me ask Jennifer a similar question, before we go into the IBM story, which is around how things have evolved since 1995, right? Emotional intelligence. What are your thoughts on that, at least from a business environment perspective?
Yeah, I can remember my first day at IBM in 1997. And I remember walking in as a 19-year-old intern. And I had a leader who we were developing and making PCs at the time. I had a leader that on my first day walked in, he says, hey, can you put this personal computer together? And it wasn't a computer. It was a motherboard, cables, hard drive. It was just a bunch of mess. Okay, 1997. And I stared at that mess of just parts. And I looked at him and I knew that he was there for me. I knew that he wasn't setting me up. So what I did was I looked around and I saw all these people. And there were people in IBM who said, I can help you. I can help you with that part. I can help you with this part. Everybody in 1997, they wanted me to be successful. I think what's changed now is you still have that. You have people who want people to be successful. But that one day that I had, people now have an hour. So you actually have a shorter time to help people be successful. So things are changing so fast. And now, if that was my day one, I probably would need to do it in 1 hour instead of 8 hours. But the people and the managers and leaders who are there now have to do it faster. And so now you need more than just your managers and your leaders. At IBM, I see that we have some of the coaches on the call here today, but everyone is expected to help touch someone's life and help coach them along the way. So I see that now everybody's involved. In 1997, it was probably just my manager and some leaders that were around. Now it's everyone.
That's a really great perspective around the speed, right? The speed of change and how that might impact the work we do either as an employee or as a manager.
Well, there's something else. Consider how the speed and the pressure of the speed affects you emotionally. It creates huge stress. And I'm sure, IBM is a little bit ahead of the curve of most companies, frankly, understanding the importance of coaching. I was, as I mentioned, at a pharmaceutical company where it's just not understood. But everybody has that stress. People handle it differently. And I think one of the jobs of a coach, one of the jobs of HR, is to help lower this overall stress level, because the way the brain is arranged, the more stress you're under, the less well you can think, the poorer the decisions. I mentioned that strategy too involves emotional intelligence, because I don't care what your strategy is, you can only get there through people. You have to communicate, you have to influence, you have to inspire, you have to motivate, have to persuade. Those are all emotional intelligence abilities. So I think the whole success of the company depends really on the level of emotional intelligence. How well can leaders communicate? How well can, do followers really want to follow? All of that matters, and it has to do with the relationship. It has to do with how you handle yourself. So I would say it's always been important. Today, it's more important than ever.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And how do we channel that support and that emotional need of our organization, whether we're HR folks or we're just a manager, right, with our team, to handle that stress?
Sure.
And as you said, it's just to use our emotional intelligence to lower that so that we can deal with the speed. Because let's be honest, the speed isn't changing. It doesn't feel like it's going to
It's
slow
accelerating,
down,
actually.
right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
not going to
Yes.
slow down,
No.
but what do we do?
It
How
starts
do
with
we
yourself.
react?
Starts with
Yes,
yourself.
yes.
Resilience is defined as the time it takes you to recover from maximal stress, back to calm. Calm and clear means you're using your brain again. So it starts with yourself, but then it radiates outward, because how well you manage your own emotions determines how well you can empathize, tune into other people. Executive presence. Well, can you be present to the other person if you're not present to yourself? No, you can't. You'll be trapped in some emotional state and not even know it. So I would say the first part of that is managing yourself and then using that as a platform for your relationships. And I think coaching is absolutely essential. You know what? In that model I have of emotional intelligence, there are 12 different competencies: teamwork, adaptability, and so on. It's like a profile you get when you go to a physical. Your triglycerides are here, your cholesterol is there. And a coach can use that information and zero in on where a person can get maximal benefit by developing further strengths. And the great thing about emotional intelligence, it's learned and learnable. And I believe coaching is the best way to do it because it's a tutorial. It's tailor-made for the person. It's not a cookie cutter.
That's right. That's right. So
Yeah, I agree.
yeah.
I think coaching is a good package. It's a good package of how you can embody emotional intelligence in one package. We call coaching touching lives at IBM. And so we call it touching lives because you're using all of those emotional intelligence competencies that Daniel was talking about. He talked about being a positive leader. How are you checking in with yourself? You can't help someone else if you don't put the mask on first, right? And so looking at how am I impacting someone else? So what we started doing was we are dealing with people just like us. People have emotions. I can't take off an emotion and say, hey, leave that at home. We used to, but not now. I can't say, leave your arm at home, leave your brain at home. We are people, we all have brains. So that means we all have bias. We all have emotions. And now we have spaces where we can actually manage it. And the coaches can help people along the way. What are you feeling? I found, Daniel, and I would love to get your thoughts on this, but I found we've trained thousands of coaches. And one of the things that I found is people don't know how to clearly identify the emotion that they're experiencing because things are so fast paced. I would love to get your thoughts on that.
That's the reason that at Goldman EI coaching training certification, we use mindfulness as a way to help people get a little internal perspective on what they're feeling, on what they're thinking. We find that that's a very powerful way for people to begin to have a point of leverage to manage what their emotion is, to identify it, to even notice it instead of being swept away by it.
So you're saying with your EI coaching, one of the steps is to help the leader become more self-emotionally aware and identify the actual emotion.
Yeah, we use a lot of methods and techniques to help people learn to monitor themselves moment to moment in situations with other people, because by noticing what you're doing, you also noticing what you project to the other person. How are you present or not? Are you self-absorbed? Are you cutting them off? Are you actually listening? These are things that it takes mindfulness or self-awareness, which is a key part of the emotional intelligence model, to know in the first place. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I would agree. I think we live in each other's minds. And I was talking, seriously, and I was talking to Dr. Srini Pillay. He's a Harvard psychiatrist and professor, and he studied the brain. And he says, no, Jennifer, seriously, when you're not around, you're in my head and I'm in your head. Because scientifically, we have stories, we have impressions, we impact people. So we're constantly living. So that emotion gets played out even when the person is not there.
Well,
I mean, you think about your bad boss. I have a great boss. Fortunately, I have like the best leader in the world. But when you think about a bad boss, they don't leave your mind when you go home from work.
Yes.
Yeah, but I would say this: if you're mindful, you know that you're telling yourself a story about the person.
Yes.
When you're face to face with that person, you get the real deal. And the story may not actually fit the person, the story that you're telling. So it's more important to tune into the person in front of you. We call it empathy. There are three kinds of empathy: cognitive empathy, knowing how the person thinks; emotional empathy, feeling with the person, so you know what they feel; and then caring about them. And I think that third part is often ignored. But wouldn't you agree that every leader needs to project and actually care about the person that's in front of them?
You know, I
Yes, I think people respond to that.
I was gonna say,
I used to study voice. I used to study
Ah,
singing, Amy. And one of the things I was taught very early was people don't know that you don't feel good in the inside,
mm,
but the way you can project, imagine what they're going through. So if you're there face to face with someone, they're going to respond to how you really feel about them. You don't have to say anything. That's how
that's
they will
beautiful.
respond.
and I was thinking through, you know, it seems like it's so hard sometimes for maybe less experienced managers. Maybe they do care, but maybe they don't know how to show that they care in some relevant,
Well,
connective way. I
you
don't
know,
know. I'm just sort of thinking out loud as you sort of said
sure.
that earlier, that we seem to, of course, want to show that we care. Of course, we want to think that our boss cares and that they are able to show it. But what if they don't know how, right?
Well,
And what if they
I,
struggle with that in
here's
some capacity?
here's a tip.
Uh-huh.
Caring starts with paying full attention to the person in front of you. Listening to be sure you understand, not listening just to respond. If you listen to respond, you're caught in your own mind. If you're listening to understand, you're actually paying attention to the person. That person feels felt. That person feels heard. That is the beginning of caring. And if you don't have that, forget it. One of the common colds of management is not listening, poor listening. Someone comes into your office, oh my God, I've got 20 things to do. What do you want? They start talking, they get cut off because the person's not really listening. And then the boss, or the senior person, whoever it may be, takes control of the conversation. They don't feel heard. So I would just say there's that one simple step to begin to care.
Absolutely. And that was, by the way, in the bad bosses list, right? Lots of
Poor
not
listening,
listening,
yeah,
poor
that's
communication
right.
skills. Absolutely. So I think that resonates well with our audience. Let me shift a little bit and connect because first, thank you to the audience for typing in questions and comments. But some of them had to, since Jennifer, you started hinting around what IBM is doing. And so, of course, we get a couple of questions. It's like, well, how are you doing this? How are you doing that? So let me pivot a little bit and sort of ask you a little bit about how IBM views coaching and broadly speaking, I know you guys do a lot of work with coaching, but how do you view coaching and how do you use coaching? And then we'll dig a little bit more deeper into what IBM practices are. Please.
So, yes, thank you for that. I think we view coaching as a way to touch someone's life. That's our motto. So, it is the responsibility of every IBMer to really value the relationship and the other person in front of them, just like Daniel said. So there are interactions that you're having all day when you're with someone at IBM. So in that moment in time, that person you're with is the most important person or people that you're with. So there's a responsibility and ownership that we shifted to being an IBMer. How are you going to show up in a way that helps touch someone's life? And what we do is we have a coach training program that any IBMer can take. They can self-select themselves. It's free. It's owned by coaches in IBM. We train coaches. It's owned by them. No one can say they stopped you from going to this Blue Core coaching class. You can go if you want to invest in yourself and learn the skills. Once you become a BCC coach, you become part owner of the movement, of the journey. And it gives you the skills literally to participate in someone's life. And we just kind of flipped it from, does coaching really have to be centralized? Does it really have to be owned by one person? I remember the comments on what makes a bad boss, and a lot of people said selfishness, self-absorbed, self-centered. Do we really have to have just one person own it? I think it's everyone's to own, and we've done that. At work, We use coaching for business. We use coaching for agile. We use agile transformation. We use coaching for, there was a young lady in BCC. She learned coaching and she shared a story. She was a new coach. She had never heard of coaching before. Her mother had a stroke, a massive stroke. And so she couldn't write, she couldn't move. So she and the doctor was trying to give her mom therapy. So she said, let me try this new coaching skill that I have. And she started seeing her mom as a person who just suffered a stroke, who needed some type of different approach. She used the coaching skills, and I think it was in 3 weeks, her mom's handwriting improved, and it was better than before her stroke because she changed her approach. So these coaching skills are about touching lives, whether they're at work, whether they're at home, whether they're here. And that's what we say, and that's why people get on board, because everyone wants people to be successful at the core. At the end of the day, we're all fellow partners and co-members in this journey. So that's what we've done to change how we approach coaching at IBM.
So let me follow up with that, Jennifer, from some audience questions. I'm going to combine a little bit. How do you address the bosses who don't use these skills, or maybe they don't want to use these skills? How do you hold people in IBM accountable? How do you hold leaders accountable to this? What happens in that area?
We have a very robust system where we call it checkpoint. So our values and our goals are around leaders being these positive leaders. So what we do is we have situations where you might have people coach them, like their team members coach them. We have group coaching. So we may have leaders who are in a cohort. So what happens when we do that, we put you in a peer-to-peer cohort and we start to focus on servant leadership. And we use a coaching approach around that and positive leadership. And so what happens is when people get into these cohorts with their peers and others, they start to hear different stories, and Daniel mentioned it, they start to see themselves. So at that point, when they start to see themselves and how they're showing up, they have a choice. So it's not really about us dealing with those managers. These managers have a choice, and they can choose to be a part of the positive leadership that we're creating. And sometimes people may not choose that. And it becomes very clear when they get around these other leaders who are peer coaching them. So we use a lot of peer coaching groups to do some of this work. But usually what we find is at the core, people do want others to be successful. They just may not know how or how to shift. And so that's why we help them shift. What does it look like when you shift to this coaching mindset? And so we give them tools and we give them support, we give them coaching, and they start to see themselves. And as they start to see themselves and they get the support and the help from the coaches inside, they're able to make that shift because it's scary. And so we have to give a lot of support, enablement, peer help, and help them recognize what it looks like when they're leading in a coaching environment.
Yeah, no, I think that's great because it's about, the topic of today was coaching mindset, right? And what you're articulating is not just the expectation. It's clearly articulated. Everyone knows this is what's expected. And that's fine if you don't know how to do it or you need help to do it, because we're going to provide you all these different tools and opportunities to figure it out and to learn. But the expectation is loud and clear. Right?
I have a question for you, Jennifer. I often get asked about coaching in a context where the company does not value it. I think you're really, really lucky at IBM that it is such a coaching mindset culturally. But what would you say to someone who wants to bring this to a company where it's not valued?
So thank you, Daniel. We have been in that situation. And in the past, we started our coaching about 20 some years ago. So you can imagine between those 20 years, you've had points in history where it wasn't as accepted or maybe understood. What I will say, and I've said this many times, I think in the last conference, we have to, coaches, people who are leading these coaching practices, we have to stop being selfish. I realized that what was preventing us from driving that coaching culture was that one coaching practice leader or program leader who wanted to just have that shiny object and check the box and say, I've done this, I've done that. When we started saying, it's not about me looking good. This is not just something I want to stand up and say I did. This is something we need to do. And we delegated ownership and power to people because this is all of us. So I think this is the selfish goal theory. When you set a goal sometimes and you say, this is a program, I want to drive this. IBM is a very large company. There's not one person who can drive a coaching culture by themselves. So when you set that goal, sometimes your goals have a little quirky way of, trying to take over the organism. So it's not just about one gene in the organism, it's about the entire organism, the entire company. And we all need each other. And so when you stop, people may not admit that they have some selfish behaviors. But when you stop trying to get that brass, shiny object and turn it over to the people, that's when we started to have success. It took us a long time to figure that out, but that's when it really worked because now it's not up to me. It's the people, not up to one leader. So now we're thriving.
Quick follow-up question. Jennifer, that's great at IBM, but let me press the question and express it a little differently. I'm talking about people who are operating in a company where the culture just does not value coaching, but they want to bring it there. It's not about them. They just see that, as you say, it touches lives. There's a human need. Do you have any advice for someone in that situation?
I think simplifying it and how do you connect the language. Remember, it's been very hard to distinguish coaching from mentoring, consulting, those type of things. So when you start to adapt the language, what language do you need to connect with that organization in that culture?
Thank you.
I also have an additional suggestion that I've heard before. I agree with Jennifer. I think that is right on. You first need to identify the language. What does coaching mean within your organization? Sure. The other advice I've heard is put some of your most senior leaders, assuming they agree, of course, into some coaching engagements so that they actually experience the coaching, the value of the coaching, the benefit of the coaching. And I've heard companies do it in two different ways. Then they sort of can cascade that, right? Because they now understand and appreciate it. But we've also worked with companies that have asked those senior leaders that have been coached to now help coach others. So it's even an explicit request, right? So that they can pay it forward, if you will. So different ways. There are definitely different ways. But your question is very right on. It's been what Jennifer has expressed at IBM has been a long and hard journey, as is coaching in general. Lots of organizations, people sort of thought about it, cared about it, but to really make it work, effective, impactful, I think it's been a very, very long journey. And it continues to be. For many organizations that may not fully embrace or understand the value of coaching.
But, like emotional intelligence itself, I think it's taken time to get momentum for people to understand the value. I think now we might be at a pivot point where it may be that more and more executives, more and more people, more and more companies are going to be asking for it. I know I just had lunch with Dan Harris, who's an ABC anchor. And he's been coached, and he's writing a book about it, and how great it's been for him. So the more of that, the better.
So I actually can support that, because in that coaching study that I did with the slide that you saw and how emotional intelligence was either number 2 or number 3, we had not been we have a laundry list that we ask the survey respondents to complete. Check why you're doing coaching, right? And they select from a long laundry list. And the slide is what we present, which is the top of the list. We had not added emotional intelligence until this recent study,
Oh.
and it went to number 2 or number 3, depending on how you looked at
Well,
it.
actually, you were asking emotional intelligence. You just didn't know it.
That's true.
Because if you look
That's
at my
true.
model, everything on that
That
top
is
list
true.
is on the model.
You know, that's a really
It's
fair
been
point.
implicit.
We made it explicit,
Yeah.
but it went straight to the top of the list.
You
And
know-
we were like, wow, what's going on here? How
So-
come we didn't pay attention more in the past? So I think you're onto something about the pivot point.
Something happened. Wired had an article about 2 months ago called Emotional Intelligence is the New Black. You have to have it in your wardrobe. You have to have it in your skill set. And I think coaching is right behind.
Right. Hey, I agree with you. So I have a slightly more provocative question, if I can find it from the audience here. Let me toss it out to the both of you. So isn't this coaching approach different than management? I should say, maybe the question is the coaching approach different than management by AI, artificial intelligence, which is the current trend? So we kind of see AI coming into the workforce and certainly coming into HR space. And by the way, AI is jumping into coaching, maybe not in exactly the way you think, but different ways for sure. How is this coaching, this is a little bit of a provocative question, I would guess, right? Where, how does this emotional intelligence, this coaching mindset, in the workplace at IBM, how does this connect and gel with AI or technologies in general? What are your thoughts on that? I'll start with Daniel, and then I'll come to
I was going to put it over to Jennifer because she's at IBM.
That's true. Fair enough. Fair enough, Jennifer. What are your thoughts on some of that?
I think the more we have a lot of AI and cognitive solutions at IBM. To be honest with you, that's when we saw the breakthrough. So the more we have AI, the more we have these cognitive solutions, you have coaching. All right. So I believe and I see where the AI and cognitive solutions, they're giving people more time to be human. So if you think about the machine economy, how IBM is a 107-year-old company. When we were started, the machine economy, the industrial era. Now we're in this different digital economy where people are leading change. You mentioned the change. Our change is fast. You looked at some of the strategic planning. You looked at the executive presence. People are leading this change. And so the AI and cognitive, it's just another tool. I love it because it gives you your humanity back.
Yeah.
It gives you your life back because you don't have to be stuck in things that are robotic and you have different points of information. So our coaching is thriving in this age. And I don't know if it's something that, I thought about 20 years ago, but the coaching now is really about human to human interaction. How do you think about AI? What are you thinking about? What ideas do you have? So now people get this space to think. There's a quote I shared with Suzanne before I came on today. I don't know if we have it, but it's a quote by Max Dupree that says, leaders owe people space. Space in the sense of freedom. Freedom in the sense of enabling our gifts to be exercised. We need to give each other the space to grow, to be ourselves, to exercise our diversity. We need to give each other space so that we may both give and receive such beautiful things as ideas, openness, dignity, joy, healing, and inclusion. And in giving each other the gift of space, we need also to offer the gifts of grace and beauty to which each of us is entitled. The more we have this technology, these solutions, the more I'm seeing humanity actually come back to the workplace. So I don't know if I could have, this is what I see today in IBM, and I'm excited.
I don't know. What do you think?
I have a short answer. As long as people are involved, you're going to need coaching, you're going to need emotional intelligence.
Yes.
But no, I'm really reflecting on what you both said, and Jennifer, how technology is giving us more time to be human. I really like that. I'm going to have to ponder that a little bit more after this webcast.
And I think there's another thing. A company wants performance. And I think you can be human in an ordinary way and human in an excellent way. And I think that the path to excellence is through how you manage yourself, how you handle your relationships. All of that can be tuned up through coaching with anybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let me just jump into one or two other questions, and just in the sake of time. But I wanted to come back to some of the other thoughts. And Jennifer, let me ask, because a couple of the audience members are asking a little bit more about how do you think about coaching at IBM, a little bit from the accountability perspective, but really more about the impact. Like when you think about employee engagement or connected to compensation or engagement or different aspects, ROI, for example. How do you view coaching in all of those different aspects of accountability or engagement or support?
Yeah, so there's always been that question is how do you measure coaching, right? How do you measure the impact? So we do use employee engagement, we use NPS, we use all of these other metrics that most businesses use. I think one of the things that helped us though is thinking about the metrics beforehand. Because when I think about it, this is true. This is a true story. So when we built our coaching operation, we operationalized it 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And so if I think about all the requests that we've received from because we have external coaches and we have internal coaches. I'm not going to say the number because I don't know the number, but a very large percentage is for emotional intelligence, executive presence, leading up and leading across. So if you really think about the core of that, it is those soft skills. Mm-hmm. And when you ask the leaders, what are those hardcore metrics that you are concerned about and you want to measure for your business? Those are not really the ones on the table. What's on the table is my employee engagement. How am I impacting the team? How am I being received by the customer? Right. And then the indirect outcome is the other hardcore facts. But the emotional intelligence and executive presence, those are most of the requests. And it shows up in how your team performs, the innovation that they have. Are they empowered? Are they creating these self-formed teams in Agile? Are they coming up with ideas? Are they taking risk? So the metrics changed when you start to think about emotional intelligence and executive presence. Now, when we had coaching, that was only for interventions. Let me just say that. And it was a negative thing. We have changed coaching now to a positive thing. It's invested in you as a person in developing your talent. When we had it as an intervention, then I think some of those other metrics were more, I guess, brought into the conversation because it's a way to say, you're not doing this. You're not doing that. So now that we don't have, we do have intervention coaching, but not as much. We have mostly the talent development, developing the person, the leader, and those metrics have changed, and they do indirectly interact with the bottom line. So we have different ways that we measure the impact of coaching based on what type of coaching the person wants.
And let me just add to that. I think that's really important what you say, Jennifer. At Goldman EI in the coaching, we use a 360 just for development. You take it at the beginning, you get coached, you take it at the end. Because it's a 360, it's the ESCI, Emotional Social Competence Inventory. You get a hard metric of how other people see you change. And these are people who see you every day. The other thing is that research by Vanessa Druskat at University of New Hampshire on teams shows that the group emotional intelligence predicts output, predicts performance. By whatever metric made sense for that particular group. So we know that the coaching in this domain, which by the way includes executive presence, that's part of emotional intelligence, that this coaching is going to bump up, if it's successful, bump up your performance and your team's performance.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. We, of course, are continually challenged in our organizations to think about what is the impact, right, to the business performance. Of course, I mean, we're all talking to people, so we all love people, but of course we all work in organizations that have business performance demands, and of course that's what we want to meet as well. And I think, I mean, Jennifer, you said it's like more and more, especially given the vast amount of technology, we actually see greater demand for coaching because the leaders need to pivot in some way,
Sure.
right? That they need to either adapt to changing needs or changing business demands. You know, they need help to be able to do their job successfully.
You know, we find adaptability, or agility as it's called these days, is the strongest predictor over a career of career
Mm.
success, career satisfaction, and also life satisfaction. These things don't stay in the office. If you can adapt at work, you can also adapt at home in your private life.
But you find that as the highest factor for.
Of all of the competencies of emotional intelligence, and there are 12, from teamwork to self-awareness, this one stands out. This is research done by my colleague Richie Boyatzis at
Mhm.
Case Western. He's found after 19 years, this predicts those outcomes.
Well, that also connects and makes perfect sense with all the changes that we've just talked about, right? To the 1 day onboarding that Jennifer had,
Yep.
you know, in 1997 to the 1 hour that we now have in onboarding her. But it's that how do you adapt
Exactly.
that would lead to that type of success. So absolutely. No, I think that's great. I also want to thank you both, thank the audience, because I see you not only asking questions, but you're helping each other and chatting with each other and supporting each other. So thank you for that community. So let me, sort of in the interest of time, let me go on to a little bit about, we touched on technology, we touched on artificial intelligence. Oh, there was a question around, are there technologies out there that match coaching engagements? And by the way, there are, and the vendor market is building in this space where, and as well as internal companies. And maybe as a quick response, I'll ask Jennifer how you guys do that at IBM, whether you use artificial intelligence to help you with some matching. But I do know of another professional services firm that have basically used AI application to help match needs. So from coaches and an executive perspective, and as well as I mentioned already, vendors are creating applications around this. But what are your thoughts on that, Jennifer?
There are a lot of platforms out there that are doing that. We have a platform called Coach Me. We have a few platforms, and we have Cognitive. I actually had one of my first patent application is called Guiding Coaching Interactions, and it has cognitive AI in it. So I would say this. It's an ecosystem that you need. There's a point of need when people seek out coaching. There's a reason they go for coaching. There's a reason that people provide coaching. So my belief is if we have an ecosystem that is always available and ever present, wherever people are in the world, and the system is there, and they could go out there in our system in IBM and search for something, we have a system in IBM that points them to the right match or right solution. So I just believe it's not a one thing, even though we do have that one thing that does matching, and we have another platform that does. So we have a lot of stuff in IBM, but it's an ecosystem of what we have, because you don't know at what day these people are going to come. Now, we do have a Coach Me platform where people can go on and they'll say, hey, I'm looking for an agile coach. They go on there and they'll type in what they're looking for. That's what they think they need, right? They think they need an agile coach. And so it'll pop up. Here are the top 5 that match your profile, that here's the experience they have. So we have that. But Daniel, when people start to look for coaching, that's where they first start. As they start to have coaching, it starts to unravel, and they realize, wait a minute, it's not the technical skill. It's the emotional intelligence I need to work on. Now I go look for emotional intelligence coach. So wherever they are in their journey, we want to have an ecosystem that's integrated with AI and solutions where they can find the right solution. So Daniel, what do you think about that?
Let me speak to someone who's not fortunate enough to work at IBM, where you have a coaching mindset everywhere. I think it's ideal, the situation you describe. There are many people who work at places where coaching is not valued, not understood to be a way to develop. These people have to go on their own. And so at Goldman EI, we have coaching for executives. That's cost effective at the top of the house. But then in the middle of the house, we have people who are going through it in groups online with a facilitator. It's a little bit like group therapy, but it's group coaching. And I think that, at the bottom, there's probably an app for this. So, you have to be cost effective too. And also, I think you have to do what's appropriate within the culture of the place you happen to be right now. And I'm sad to say we can't all be at IBM.
Come on, it's a great place. We love it.
Always recruiting. I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes,
Absolutely. So you know what? We only have about 5 minutes left. Let me sort of wrap up with the last question to the both of you. We both described long journeys on this webcast, right? Since your first day of onboarding with Jennifer and your first book in the mid-90s.
Sure.
What's sort of one lessons learned or one tip, either about the coaching work or the emotional intelligence work that you can share with our audience that maybe they could ponder, as on their commute home, or maybe think about doing something a little differently tomorrow at the workplace?
Let me suggest a practice. It's one that I mentioned in passing, but I think it's very important. And that is paying attention to whether you're listening. Paying attention to whether, when you're with another person, are you fully present? Have you put aside your distractions? Are you turned away from your screen? Are you ignoring your phone? All of the kinds of things that impede being fully present to the person in front of you. Talk about executive presence. I'm focusing on the presence part of that because I think it's not just executives. Everybody needs to be present to the other person if we're going to do our best together. So I would say pay attention to your own attention.
I like that a lot. Jennifer?
I would say that we're not alone. There are a lot of people there to help go through change. And if we realize that this is not all on our shoulders, it's bigger than us, each and every one of us, we can have a community of people that help solve some of the world's biggest problems. So my advice is, it's bigger than you, it's bigger than me, and we're all in this together.
Beautiful.
I think that's great. And if I can ask the control room to bring back the last slide that we have, I really want to first thank Jennifer, thank Daniel. Terrific. It's just an excellent combination of topics around the EI and the coaching and how this could really make a difference in our businesses. And we just talked about all the reasons why it's so much more important today than it ever has been. Right? We actually all need to become EI experts, and we all need to do more coaching in our workplaces and maybe even in our personal lives, but that's a different webcast. Let me thank the audience for joining us for today and all your engagement online and helping each other, supporting each other. Really, really appreciate that. Again, I'm Amy Abel from the Conference Board. Thank you so much for your time today.